In the unforgiving deserts of Afghanistan, where respect is earned through blood, sweat, and split-second decisions that mean the difference between life and death, a single radio call sign would become legendary. But before that moment of truth, Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez faced something far more dangerous than enemy fire: the doubt of her own brothers in arms. The morning sun cast long shadows across forward operating base Lightning as Captain Martinez walked toward the briefing tent, her boots crunching against the gravel. Behind her, she could hear the whispered comments, the snickers, the casual dismissal that had followed her for months. To most of the Marines at the base, she was just another female officer trying to prove herself in a man's world. They saw her call sign Phoenix as nothing more than wishful thinking. What they didn't know was that in less than 72 hours, a radio transmission would crackle across the Afghan mountains that would silence every doubter forever. 3 words that would turn mockery into respect, skepticism into awe, and transform a captain fighting for acceptance into a legend whispered about in Marine Corps barracks around the world. But first, she had to survive what was coming next. Captain Sarah Martinez had been at forward operating base Lightning for 6 months, and every single day had been a battle for respect. Not the kind of battle she'd trained for at Quantico, where bullets flew and bombs exploded. This was something far more insidious: the quiet war of being constantly underestimated, questioned, and dismissed by the very Marine she was supposed to lead alongside. The morning started like any other at the remote outpost in Helmand Province. The Afghan sun was already climbing toward what would become another scorching day, and the base was buzzing with the familiar sounds of military life. Generators hummed their constant rhythm. Vehicles rumbled past, kicking up clouds of dust, and Marines went about their duties with the practiced efficiency of men who knew that routine was often the only thing standing between them and chaos. Sarah walked through the compound with her head high and her uniform crisp, despite the fact that it would be wrinkled and dust-covered within the hour. She learned early in her deployment that appearance mattered more here than it ever had stateside. Every perceived weakness, every small imperfection would be magnified and used as ammunition by those who believe she didn't belong. The whispers followed her wherever she went. She caught fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached, saw the eye rolls and smirks that the men thought she didn't notice. Her call sign Phoenix had been assigned during her first week at the base, supposedly because of her red hair and fierce determination. But Sarah knew the real reason. It was a joke. The Phoenix rises from ashes, and most of the Marines here were betting she'd crash and burn instead. Major Tom Bradley was the worst of them. A gruff career Marine with 22 years of service, he made no secret of his belief that women had no place in combat roles. He'd been passed over for promotion twice, and his bitterness had calcified into a hard shell of resentment that he directed at anyone he saw as getting opportunities he felt he deserved more. That morning, Sarah was heading to the intelligence briefing when she heard Bradley's voice carrying across the motor pool. He was holding court with a group of junior Marines, his voice loud enough to ensure she'd hear every word. "You know what they ought to call her?" Bradley was saying, gesturing with a wrench he'd been using to work on a Humvee. "Phoenix? More like crash and burn. That's what's going to happen the first time she gets into real trouble out there." The Marines around him chuckled nervously. Most of them were young, barely old enough to drink back home, and they looked up to Bradley's experience, even if they weren't entirely comfortable with his attitude. Sarah had learned that in the military, loyalty often trumped personal feelings, and these kids weren't about to challenge a senior NCO, especially not to defend an officer they barely knew. "I'm telling you guys," Bradley continued, wiping his hands on an oily rag, "the brass back home might be all about this diversity nonsense, but out here it's about one thing. Can you pull the trigger when it counts? Can you make the hard choices? And I got serious doubts about whether Captain Princess over there has what it takes." Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she kept walking. She learned that responding to Bradley's provocations only gave him more ammunition. Instead, she focused on the mission ahead. Today's briefing would cover a new operation in the Sanjin Valley, a notorious Taliban stronghold where several previous missions had gone sideways. Intelligence suggested that a high-value target was operating in the area, someone important enough that Central Command was willing to risk significant resources to capture or eliminate. The briefing tent was already crowded when Sarah arrived. Officers and senior enlisted Marines filled the folding chairs, their faces grim as they studied the maps and satellite photos projected on the screen at the front of the tent. Colonel Jim Harrison, the base commander, stood at the podium looking every inch the career infantry officer. His gray hair was regulation short. His uniform was perfectly pressed despite the heat, and his pale blue eyes missed nothing. "Good morning, Marines," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in uniform. "What I'm about to brief you on is classified secret, and it doesn't leave this tent. We have a time-sensitive target in the Sanjin Valley. Intelligence indicates that Ahmad Shah Massoud, a Taliban commander responsible for at least a dozen IED attacks against coalition forces, is operating from a compound approximately 15 kilometers north of the valley floor." Harrison clicked a remote, and the image on the screen changed to show a detailed satellite photo of a walled compound nestled among rocky hills. The building looked like a fortress with high walls, multiple courtyards, and what appear to be several escape routes leading into the surrounding mountains. "The target is heavily defended," Harrison continued. "We estimate at least 30 to 40 fighters, with heavy weapons including mortars and possibly anti-aircraft missiles. The compound sits on high ground with excellent fields of fire in all directions. Any direct assault would be extremely costly." Sarah studied the image carefully, her mind already working through the tactical challenges. The compound's position was nearly perfect from a defensive standpoint. An attacking force would have to advance uphill across open ground, exposed to fire from multiple positions. Even with air support, casualties would be heavy. "The plan," Harrison said, clicking to the next slide, "is a night raid utilizing two companies. Alpha Company will approach from the east and establish a blocking position to prevent escape. Bravo Company will conduct the assault from the south. Close air support will be provided by Apache helicopters, and we'll have a Predator drone overhead for intelligence gathering." Sarah raised her hand. "Sir, what about civilian casualties? Intelligence on non-combatants in the area?" Harrison nodded approvingly. "Good question, Captain. According to our sources, the compound houses only fighters and their immediate families. However, we cannot rule out the presence of civilians, which is why rules of engagement will be strictly enforced." Major Bradley spoke up from the back of the tent. "Colonel, who's leading the assault element?" "Major Rodriguez will command Bravo Company," Harrison replied. "Captain Martinez will serve as his executive officer and coordinate air support." The tent fell silent. Sarah felt every eye turned toward her, and she could practically feel the skepticism radiating from the assembled Marines. Bradley's expression was openly hostile. "Sir," Bradley said, his voice carefully controlled but with an edge that everyone could hear, "with respect, wouldn't it be better to have someone with more experience in that role? This is a high-value target. We can't afford any mistakes." Harrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught a slight tightening around his eyes. The colonel was a fair man, but he was also a political animal who understood the delicate balance required to maintain unit cohesion. "Major Bradley," Harrison said quietly, "Captain Martinez graduated from the Advanced Infantry Officer course with honors. She has an exemplary record and the full confidence of this command. Do you have specific concerns about her qualifications?" Bradley hesitated. To directly question an officer's competence in front of the entire command group would be a serious breach of protocol, one that could end his career. But Sarah could see the frustration in his face, the desire to speak his mind warring with military discipline. "No, sir," Bradley finally said. "No specific concerns." "Good," Harrison replied. "Then we'll proceed as planned. The operation launches tomorrow night. I want all unit commanders to brief their people and ensure equipment is ready. Any questions?" There were a few technical questions about ammunition loads and communication frequencies, but The meeting broke up quickly after that. Sarah gathered her papers and headed for the exit, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. She'd been given a crucial role in a high-stakes mission, exactly the kind of opportunity she'd been hoping for. But she also knew that every Marine on the base would be watching to see if she measured up. Outside the briefing tent, the heat hit her like a physical blow. The temperature was already climbing past 100 degrees, and the sun wasn't even at its peak yet. Sarah headed toward the communication center to coordinate with the air support elements, but she'd only made it a few steps when Bradley's voice stopped her. "Captain Martinez." She turned to find a major approaching, his expression unreadable. Up close, Bradley looked older than his 43 years. The Afghan sun and the stress of multiple deployments had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth, and his hands bore the scars of 20 years working with military equipment. "Major," Sarah replied evenly. "Look," Bradley said, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I know you think I've got it in for you personally, but that's not what this is about." "What is it about then?" Bradley was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the brown hills that surrounded the base. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost reflective. "I've been in this man's Marine Corps for over 2 decades, he said. "I've seen good Marines die because someone made a mistake, because someone wasn't ready for the moment when everything went to hell. And I've seen what happens to units when people start questioning whether their leaders can handle the pressure." Sarah felt a flash of anger, but she kept her voice level. "And you think I can't handle the pressure?" "I think you haven't been tested yet," Bradley replied. "Not really. You've been here 6 months, done some convoy escorts, handled some routine operations. But tomorrow night, you're going to be coordinating airstrikes in a hot zone while Marines are getting shot at. You're going to have to make split-second decisions that could save lives or get people killed. And the truth is, Captain, I don't know if you're ready for that." There was something in Bradley's tone that gave Sarah pause. Beneath the hostility and the sexism, she heard something else, genuine concern. Not for her, but for the Marines who would be depending on her. "I understand your concerns, Major," she said finally. "But, respectfully, this is exactly the kind of mission I've trained for my entire career. I'm ready." Bradley studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "For all our sakes, Captain, I hope you're right." He walked away without another word, leaving Sarah standing in the blazing sun with her thoughts racing. She knew that tomorrow night would be more than just another mission. It would be a test of everything she'd worked for, everything she believed about herself. And if she failed, it wouldn't just be her career on the line. It would be the lives of Marines who were counting on her to do her job. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah spent hours studying the target area, memorizing every detail of the satellite photos, reviewing the air support procedures, and coordinating with the helicopter pilots who would provide close air support during the assault. She went over the radio frequencies until she knew them by heart, studied the weapons systems that would be at her disposal, and rehearsed the communication protocols that would be crucial during the heat of battle. As evening approached, Sarah found herself standing on the base's makeshift observation deck, looking out at the mountains that rose like jagged teeth against the sunset. Somewhere out there, in a compound she'd only seen in photographs, a Taliban commander was preparing for what might be his last night of freedom. In less than 24 hours, she would help coordinate an assault that would either end his operations or add to the growing list of coalition casualties in this endless war. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Sergeant First Class David Kim was walking toward her, his expression serious. Kim was one of the few people on the base who had never questioned her competence or made her feel like an outsider. A Korean American from Los Angeles. He had 15 years in the Corps and a reputation for keeping his people alive in difficult situations. "Evening, Captain," Kim said, joining her at the railing. "Evening, Sergeant. How are the preparations coming?" "Good. The boys are ready. Equipment's checked and double-checked. Everyone knows their job." He paused, then added quietly, "They're nervous, though. Word's gotten around about tomorrow night." Sarah nodded. It was impossible to keep something like this completely secret on a base this small. The Marines might not know the specific details, but they could sense when something big was brewing. "Nervous is good," she said. "Nervous keeps you alive." Kim studied her profile in the fading light. "You know, Captain, there's something you should understand about the guys giving you a hard time." "What's that?" "Most of them don't really doubt your abilities. They're just scared." Sarah turned to look at him, surprised. "Scared of what?" "Change," Kim replied simply. "You represent something new, something different. And in a place like this, different feels dangerous." These Marines have been doing things the same way for generations. Having a woman in a combat role forces them to question assumptions they've never had to think about before. "That doesn't excuse the way some of them treat me." "No, it doesn't," Kim agreed. "But it might help you understand where they're coming from. Major Bradley, for instance. He's not a bad man, just an old-school Marine who's seen the world change around him and doesn't know how to adapt." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing what Kim had said. She'd been so focused on proving herself, on fighting for respect, that she hadn't considered the possibility that her presence might genuinely unsettle some of the Marines around her. "Tomorrow night," Kim continued, "you're going to have your chance to show them who you really are. Not as a woman trying to prove herself, but as a Marine doing her job. And when that happens, when you save lives and complete the mission, all this other stuff is going to seem pretty small." He was right, Sarah knew. Tomorrow night would be her moment of truth. All the training, all the preparation, all the long months of earning her place would come down to how well she performed under fire. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt a calm certainty settling over her. She was ready. As the last light faded from the Afghan sky and the base settled into its nighttime routine, Sarah Martinez stood on that observation deck and made herself a promise. Tomorrow night, she would show everyone, Bradley, the Marines under her command, and herself, that she belonged here. That her call sign Phoenix wasn't a joke, but a promise of what she could become. She had no way of knowing that in less than 36 hours, those 3 words would crackle across the radio waves and change everything. Geronimo actual. But first, she had to survive what was coming next. The pre-dawn hours at Forward Operating Base Lightning carried a different energy than the rest of the day. There was something almost sacred about the time before sunrise, when the oppressive Afghan heat hadn't yet begun to build, and the mountains stood like silent sentinels against the sky, just beginning to show the first hints of light. Captain Sarah Martinez had been awake since 3 in the morning, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion from the previous day's preparations. She stood in the small chapel that doubled as the base's multi-faith worship center, a converted storage container that somehow managed to feel peaceful despite its humble origins. A simple wooden cross hung on one wall, while prayer rugs were neatly stacked in the corner for Muslim Marines. The space represented the diversity of the modern military, where people of all backgrounds served side by side in pursuit of common goals. Sarah wasn't particularly religious, but she found comfort in the quiet ritual of preparation. In a few hours, she would be coordinating one of the most complex operations of her career, and every decision she made could mean the difference between success and catastrophe, between Marines coming home safely and families receiving visits from casualty notification officers. The door behind her opened quietly, and she turned to see Chaplain Lieutenant David Foster entering. Foster was a soft-spoken man in his 30s who had somehow managed to maintain an air of calm wisdom despite 3 combat deployments. His presence had been a source of strength for many Marines struggling with the moral complexities of war. "Couldn't sleep either?" Foster asked, settling into one of the plastic chairs that served as pews. "Too much to think about," Sarah replied, taking a seat across from him. "How do you do it, Chaplain? How do you find peace before something like this?" Foster smiled gently. "I don't think the goal is to find peace, Captain. The goal is to find purpose. Peace comes later, when you know you've done everything in your power to serve those counting on you." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had brought her here, to this remote outpost in one of the world's most dangerous places. Growing up in East Los Angeles, She'd never imagined she would become a Marine officer, much less find herself preparing to coordinate a combat mission against Taliban fighters. Her father had been a mechanic who worked 3 jobs to support his family, and her mother had cleaned office buildings at night while raising 4 children during the day. Sarah had been the first person in her family to graduate from college, earning a degree in international relations from UCLA before deciding that she wanted to serve her country in a more direct way than diplomacy or politics allowed. The Marine Corps had given her structure, purpose, and the chance to lead Marines in some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable. But it had also forced her to confront prejudices and assumptions she'd never had to deal with in civilian life. The military prided itself on being a meritocracy, where performance mattered more than background, but the reality was more complicated than the recruiting poster suggested. You know what I've learned in my years of ministering to Marines? Foster said, breaking the silence. The ones who struggle most aren't the ones who are afraid of dying. It's the ones who are afraid of failing the people who depend on them. Sarah looked up at him, recognizing the truth in his words. She wasn't afraid of getting hurt or even killed during the upcoming mission. What terrified her was the possibility that her performance might cost other Marines their lives, or that her mistakes might allow a dangerous enemy to escape and kill more coalition forces in the future. Major Bradley stopped by yesterday, Foster continued. He's struggling with some things. The changing nature of the Corps, his own role in it. He's not a bad man, you know. Just someone who's seen a lot of good Marines die over the years, and has developed some strong opinions about how to keep people alive. He thinks I'm a liability, Sarah said bluntly. He thinks change is a liability, Foster corrected. There's a difference. Give him a chance to see who you really are, and I think you might be surprised by his response. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation. Through the small window, Sarah could see the first convoy of Marines heading out for their staging positions. The operation was beginning to take shape, and soon she would need to report to the command center for final briefings and equipment checks. "Chaplain," she said as she stood to leave, "if something happens to me tonight, nothing's going to happen to you," Foster said firmly. "But if you're worried about unfinished business, the time to take care of that is now, before you leave the wire." Sarah nodded and headed toward the door. She had one stop to make before reporting for duty, something she'd been putting off, but knew she couldn't delay any longer. The communications center was already bustling with activity when Sarah arrived. Banks of radio equipment hummed and crackled as operators maintained contact with various units across the region. In the center of it all sat Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a communications specialist who had become something of a legend for her ability to maintain radio contact under the most challenging conditions. "Morning, Captain," Rodriguez said, looking up from the console where she was monitoring multiple frequencies. "Looking for a secure line home." "If you can arrange it," Sarah replied. "Just for a few minutes." Rodriguez worked her magic with the satellite communication system, and within minutes Sarah found herself connected to her parents' house in Los Angeles. It was evening there, and she could hear the familiar sounds of her family gathered around the dinner table in the background when her mother answered. "Mija," her mother exclaimed, the joy in her voice carrying clearly across the thousands of miles that separated them. "How are you? Are you eating enough? Are you staying safe?" Sarah smiled despite herself. No matter how far she traveled or how dangerous her job became, she would always be her mother's little girl. The conversation was brief. Operational security prevented her from discussing details about her mission, but it served its purpose. Hearing her family's voices reminded her why she was here, why the sacrifice and hardship were worthwhile. After ending the call, Sarah made her way to the armory to collect her personal weapons and equipment. The building was crowded with Marines conducting final equipment checks, the air thick with the smell of gun oil and the nervous energy that always preceded a major operation. Sergeant First Class Kim was there, methodically checking each piece of gear that would accompany him on the mission. Despite his calm exterior, Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who had done this many times before. "Sergeant," Sarah called out as she approached her assigned locker. "How's the mood among the troops?" Kim looked up from a night vision device he was inspecting. "Mixed, Captain. The experienced guys know their jobs and trust the plan. Some of the newer Marines are dealing with pre-combat nerves. Nothing we can't handle." Sarah nodded as she began her own equipment check. Her personal weapon was an M4 carbine, modified with the latest optics and accessories. She'd spent countless hours on the range with the rifle, until operating it became as natural as breathing. Tonight, her life might depend on that familiarity. In addition to her rifle, Sarah carried a sidearm, body armor, communications equipment, first aid supplies, and enough ammunition for an extended firefight. The total weight of her gear approached 60 pounds, but she trained with similar loads until she barely noticed the burden. "Captain Martinez?" Sarah turned to find a young Marine standing behind her, barely old enough to shave and looking nervous enough to throw up. She recognized him as Private First Class Thompson, one of the newest arrivals to the base. "What is it, Thompson?" "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, well, some of the guys have been talking, and we want you to know that we trust you. Whatever happens tonight, we know you've got our backs." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the Afghan heat. She'd been so focused on proving herself to the senior Marines that she'd forgotten about the younger ones, the privates and corporals who looked to their officers for guidance and reassurance. "Thompson," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "the most important thing you can remember tonight is to trust your training and trust the Marines on your left and right. We've all prepared for this mission, and we're all going to look out for each other." "Got it." "Yes, ma'am," Thompson replied, his nervousness replaced by determination. As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself moving between different groups of Marines, answering questions, providing reassurance, and reviewing last-minute details. The operation was scheduled to begin at sunset, which meant they had most of the day to complete their preparations and move into position. The briefing at noon was more detailed than the previous day's overview. Intelligence had provided updated information about the target compound, including the locations of probable guard positions and the most likely escape routes. The plan remained essentially the same, but small adjustments were made based on the new information. Major Rodriguez, who would command the assault element, was a seasoned infantry officer with 2 previous combat deployments. Sarah had worked with him on several smaller operations and respected his tactical expertise and his ability to remain calm under pressure. "Captain Martinez," Rodriguez said as the briefing concluded, "I want you to know that I specifically requested you for this operation. Your ability to coordinate air support is exactly what we're going to need tonight." The comment was made loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, including Major Bradley. Sarah caught Bradley's eye as she left the briefing room, but his expression was unreadable. The afternoon passed slowly, with that peculiar mixture of boredom and anticipation that characterized military life. Marines cleaned weapons that were already spotless, checked equipment they'd already verified multiple times, and engaged in the kind of nervous conversation that helped pass the time while avoiding discussion of what might go wrong. Sarah spent most of the afternoon in the command center, coordinating with the helicopter pilots who would provide close air support during the operation. The lead pilot was Chief Warrant Officer Janet Nash, a veteran aviator who had flown combat missions in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Nash had a reputation for getting Marines out of tight spots, and Sarah felt a measure of relief knowing that such an experienced pilot would be overhead during the assault. "The target area is challenging," Nash explained, pointing to a large-scale map of the valley. "The compound sits on high ground surrounded by steep terrain. We'll have to approach from the south to avoid the mountains, but that means we'll be silhouetted against the sky for anyone with night vision equipment." "What about anti-aircraft threats?" Sarah asked. "Intelligence says they might have some shoulder-fired missiles," Nash replied. "We'll stay high and use terrain masking as much as possible, but there's always some risk. That's why coordination is going to be crucial. I need to know exactly where your people are at all times so we don't accidentally engage friendly forces." They spent an hour going over communication procedures and establishing protocols for different scenarios. Sarah felt a growing confidence in their ability to work together effectively, which would be crucial when the shooting started, and split-second decisions could determine the outcome of the entire operation. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the base, the Marines began their final preparations. Equipment was loaded into vehicles, communications were tested one final time, and commanders gathered for a last meeting with Colonel Harrison. Remember, Harrison told the assembled officers, "Our primary objective is to capture or kill Ahmad Shah Massoud. Everything else is secondary. But I want everyone to come home tonight. Take care of each other out there." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. In a few hours, she would be coordinating air strikes and artillery support for Marines advancing under enemy fire. Every decision she made would ripple outward, affecting the success of the mission and the safety of everyone involved. But as she looked around at the Marines preparing for the operation, she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Forward Operating Base Lightning: a sense of belonging. These men and women were her comrades, her fellow warriors, and tonight they would depend on each other in the most fundamental way possible. Major Bradley approached her as she was conducting a final check of her communications equipment. His usual hostile expression had been replaced by something that might have been respect. "Captain," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been unfair to you since you arrived here." Sarah looked up at him in surprise. "Major, let me finish," Bradley said, holding up a hand. "I've been thinking about what Sergeant Kim said to me yesterday about being afraid of change. He was right. I've spent so many years doing things one way that I forgot that the Corps has always evolved, always adapted to meet new challenges." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "What I'm trying to say is that tonight, you're not just representing yourself out there. You're representing all the Marines who will come after you, all the women who want to serve their country in combat roles. And I want you to know that you have my support." Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. "Thank you, Major. That means more than you know." Bradley nodded awkwardly and walked away, leaving Sarah to process what had just happened. The conversation represented more than just a personal reconciliation. It was a recognition that the military was changing, evolving to include people who had previously been excluded from certain roles. As darkness began to fall across the Afghan landscape, the convoy of vehicles carrying the assault force pulled out of Forward Operating Base Lightning. Sarah rode in the command vehicle with Major Rodriguez, monitoring multiple radio frequencies and coordinating with air support elements that were already moving into position. The drive to the staging area took 2 hours over rough mountain roads. The convoy moved without lights, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous terrain. Sarah could feel her heart rate increasing as they got closer to their objective, the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that came before combat. At the staging area, a flat piece of ground about 5 kilometers from the target compound, the Marines conducted final preparations. Weapons were checked one last time, communications were verified, and commanders synchronized their watches. Sarah established her position at the mobile command post, a collection of radio equipment and computers that would allow her to coordinate air support throughout the operation. Around her, Marines applied camouflage face paint and made final adjustments to their equipment. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see the target compound in the distance, its walls and buildings visible as geometric shapes against the surrounding terrain. Somewhere inside those walls was a man responsible for killing dozens of coalition forces, and in a few hours she would help coordinate the assault that would either capture him or end his threat permanently. The radio crackled to life with a transmission from the Apache helicopters circling overhead. "Phoenix 6, this is Guardian 2-1. We're on station and ready to provide fire support." Sarah keyed her microphone. "Guardian 2-1, Phoenix 6 copies. Stand by for further instructions." Major Rodriguez appeared beside her, his face blackened with camouflage paint and his eyes bright with anticipation. "Captain, are you ready?" Sarah checked her equipment one final time, and looked out at the Marines preparing to advance on the enemy compound. In a few minutes, they would cross the line of departure and begin an operation that would test everything they trained for. "Ready as I'll ever be, sir," she replied. Rodriguez nodded and moved toward the front of the formation. Sarah could hear him speaking quietly to his squad leaders, giving final instructions and words of encouragement. Then he raised his hand, and the entire assault force began moving toward the objective. Sarah remained at the command post, but she could feel the energy of the advancing Marines as they disappeared into the darkness. Soon, the radio would explode with activity as contact was made with the enemy. Soon, she would be coordinating fire support in the middle of a firefight that could determine the outcome of the entire operation. As the last Marine disappeared from view, Sarah settled in behind her radio and prepared for the battle ahead. She had no way of knowing that in less than 3 hours, she would make a decision that would earn her a place in Marine Corps legend. The calm before the storm was ending. The real test was about to begin. The first shots came at 0247 hours, shattering the mountain silence like thunder rolling through the valleys. Captain Sarah Martinez heard the distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles echoing off the rocky walls of the canyon, followed immediately by the deeper rumble of American M4 carbines returning fire. The battle for the Taliban compound had begun. Sarah sat hunched over her radio equipment at the mobile command post, her eyes fixed on the glowing screens that showed the positions of friendly forces advancing on the target. Through her headset, she could hear the calm, professional voices of Marines reporting contact with the enemy, their training taking over even as bullets whistled around them. "Phoenix 6, this is Steel 1-1. We have contact at the outer perimeter. Enemy is dug in behind prepared positions. Requesting immediate fire support, over." Major Rodriguez's voice came through clearly despite the sound of gunfire in the background. Sarah could picture him pressed against cover somewhere near the compound walls, calculating distances and angles while his Marines engaged targets that were trying to kill them. "Steel 1-1. Phoenix 6 copies," Sarah responded, her fingers flying over the computer keyboard as she plotted coordinates. "Stand by for Apache gun runs. Mark your positions with IR strobes and ensure all friendly forces are accounted for." The Apache helicopters had been orbiting at a safe distance, waiting for the ground forces to make contact. Now they came swooping in like mechanical angels of death, their rotors beating a rhythm that could be felt as much as heard. Sarah watched the thermal displays as the helicopters positioned themselves for their first gun run. "Guardian 2-1, Phoenix 6. I have enemy positions marked at Grid 41, our PP 12345 67890. Friendly forces are approximately 200 meters south of target area. You are cleared hot. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-1 copies. Inbound for gun run. 30 seconds. Through her night vision scope, Sarah could see the muzzle flashes from the compound as Taliban fighters poured fire down at the advancing Marines. The defenders had clearly been expecting an attack and had prepared accordingly. Heavy machine guns had been positioned to cover the likely approach routes, and the Marines were having to advance by bounds, using every piece of available cover. The Apache's 30mm cannon opened fire with a sound like a buzz saw cutting through steel. Streams of high-explosive rounds struck the compound walls, sending chunks of concrete and metal flying through the air. Secondary explosions lit up the night as ammunition stores were hit. "Guardian 2-1. Good hits on target," Rodriguez reported. "Enemy fire from the northwest corner has been suppressed. Steel elements are advancing to phase line blue." Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction. The air support was working exactly as planned, suppressing enemy positions and allowing the ground forces to advance. But she knew that the most dangerous part of the operation was still ahead. Once the Marines breached the compound walls, the fighting would become close and personal, with limited opportunities for air support. "Phoenix 6, this is Steel 2-2, came another voice over the radio. "We have wounded Marines in my position. Request immediate medevac." Sarah's stomach clenched. Casualties were always a possibility in operations like this, but hearing about wounded Marines still hit her like a physical blow. She immediately switched to the medical evacuation frequency. Dustoff 77, Phoenix 6. We have wounded Marines requiring immediate evacuation. Grid 41 RPP 2 Mi 366 de Mi obsutecinzic. Landing zone is cold at this time, but may receive indirect fire. Phoenix 6, Dustoff 77 copies. Inbound to your location. ETA 15 minutes. The medical evacuation helicopter would brave enemy fire to reach wounded Marines. Another example of the brotherhood that bound military units together. No one would be left behind, regardless of the risk to the rescue crews. The battle continued to escalate as the Marines fought their way closer to the main compound buildings. The Taliban defenders were well-trained and disciplined, using the terrain and prepare positions to maximum advantage. They had also demonstrated a willingness to fight to the death rather than surrender, which meant the Marines would have to clear each building room by room. Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1. We're taking heavy fire from a building at the northeast corner of the compound. Looks like a machine gun position. Can you put some heat on it? Sarah studied her displays, calculating angles and distances. The building Rodriguez was talking about was close to the positions held by his Marines, which meant any fire support would have to be extremely precise. A mistake could result in friendly casualties. Steel 1-1, stand by. Guardian 2-3, Phoenix 6. I need you to engage a building at Grid 41, RPP 12355, 67895. Friendly forces are within 100 meters. Use extreme caution with your targeting. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-3. That's danger close. Request confirmation of target location and friendly positions. Sarah double-checked her calculations, her training taking over despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Danger close meant that friendly forces were within the minimum safe distance for the weapons being employed. One small error could kill the Marines she was trying to help. Guardian 2-3. Phoenix 6 confirms danger close engagement. Friendly forces are marked with IR strobes. Target is the two-story building 50 meters north of the strobes. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-3 copies danger close. Inbound for precision engagement. The Apache pilot was one of the best in the business, but even the most skilled aviator could make mistakes when working so close to friendly forces. Sarah held her breath as the helicopter lined up for its attack run, knowing that dozens of Marines' lives depended on the accuracy of the next few seconds. The Hellfire missile streaked through the darkness like a falling star, its guidance system locked onto the target building. The explosion lit up the night, and when the smoke cleared, the machine gun position had been eliminated. Cheers could be heard over the radio from the Marines who had been pinned down by the enemy fire. Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1. Outstanding shooting. The machine gun is down, and we're advancing to the next phase line. But the celebration was short-lived. As the Marines moved closer to the main buildings, the enemy resistance increased dramatically. Sarah could hear the intensity of the firefight building through her headset, with multiple voices reporting contact and requesting support. Phoenix 6, this is Steel 2-1. We've breached the outer wall, but the enemy has fallen back to prepare positions inside the compound. We're taking fire from multiple buildings. Request immediate suppression. Sarah studied her displays frantically, trying to identify targets that could be engaged without endangering the Marines who were now fighting inside the compound itself. The situation was becoming increasingly complex, with friendly and enemy forces intermixed in a way that made air support extremely difficult. All Guardian elements, Phoenix 6. Friendly forces are now inside the objective area. Extreme caution with all engagements. Positive identification of targets is mandatory. The radio traffic was becoming a constant stream of voices as squad leaders reported their positions and requested support for their advancing Marines. Sarah found herself coordinating multiple aircraft, artillery units, and ground forces simultaneously, her training allowing her to process information and make decisions at a speed that would have been impossible just months earlier. Phoenix 6, this is Steel 1-1. We've located what appears to be the main command building, but it's heavily defended. We need immediate support to suppress the defenders before we can assault the building. Sarah could hear the frustration in Rodriguez's voice. The Marines had fought their way through the outer defenses, but the final objective was still beyond their reach. The Taliban commander was probably in that building, and every minute of delay gave him more opportunities to escape or destroy valuable intelligence. Steel 1-1, Phoenix 6. Can you mark the target building with laser designation? I'll coordinate a precision strike. Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1 copies. Building is marked. Be advised, we believe there may be hostages or valuable intelligence inside. Recommend minimal explosive effects. Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. A full missile strike would level the building and eliminate the defenders, but it might also kill innocent civilians or destroy information that could save American lives in future operations. She needed a solution that would neutralize the threat without causing excessive collateral damage. Guardian 2-1, Phoenix 6. I need you to engage the marked building with 30mm cannon only. Precision shots on defensive positions. Avoid structural damage to the main building. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-1 copies. Beginning gun runs now. The Apache's cannon began its deadly work, firing short bursts that shattered windows and suppressed the defenders without bringing down the building. It was precision shooting at its finest, the kind of skilled marksmanship that required years of training and nerves of steel. But even as the air support worked to suppress the defenders, Sarah could see that the operation was becoming increasingly dangerous for the Marines on the ground. They had been in contact with the enemy for over an hour, and ammunition was running low. More importantly, the longer they remained in the compound, the greater the chance that enemy reinforcements would arrive. Phoenix 6, this is Overwatch, came a new voice over the radio. The unmanned Predator drone, circling high above the battlefield, had been monitoring the surrounding area for signs of enemy movement. Overwatch, Phoenix 6. Send your traffic. Phoenix 6, I'm tracking approximately 24 vehicles moving toward your location from the north. ETA to your position is 30 minutes. Recommend you expedite mission completion. Sarah felt her heart rate spike. Enemy reinforcements were exactly what they didn't need right now. If those vehicles reached the compound before the Marines could complete their mission and withdraw, the entire force could be trapped and overwhelmed. All steel elements, Phoenix 6. Be advised, enemy reinforcements are inbound from the north. ETA, 30 minutes. Expedite mission completion. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable, and she could hear the tempo of the battle increasing as Marines pressed their attacks with renewed determination. They needed to find the Taliban commander and extract before the reinforcements arrived. Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1. We're assaulting the main building now. Heavy resistance on all floors. Request continuous fire support on the surrounding buildings. Steel 1-1, Phoenix 6 copies. All Guardian elements. Provide continuous suppression of buildings surrounding the main objective. Keep the defenders' heads down while the assault team works. The next 20 minutes were a blur of radio traffic, explosions, and gunfire as the Marines fought their way through the compound building by building. Sarah coordinated a symphony of destruction, directing helicopter gun runs, artillery strikes, and mortar fire to support the advancing infantry. Despite the intensity of the battle, her training allowed her to maintain the calm, professional demeanor that was essential for effective command and control. Each decision was calculated and precise, each order delivered with the confidence that came from months of preparation and years of military education. Phoenix 6, this is Steel 2-2. We've secured the second floor of the main building. Found what looks like a command center with maps and communication equipment. No sign of the primary target yet. Steel 2-2, Phoenix 6 copies. Continue the search. Time is critical. Sarah glanced at her watch. 25 minutes until the estimated arrival of enemy reinforcements. The Marines needed to find their target and get out or risk being caught in a running battle with superior numbers of enemy fighters. The radio crackled again with Rodriguez's voice, but this time there was something different in his tone. Excitement mixed with urgency. Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1. We got him. Primary target is in custody on the 3rd floor. Repeat, primary target is captured. Beginning extraction procedures now. A cheer went up from the Marines at the command post, but Sarah remained focused on her responsibilities. Getting the target was only half the mission. Now, they had to get everyone out safely. All steel elements, Phoenix 6. Primary objective is complete. Begin withdrawal to extraction point Alpha. Guardian elements, provide cover for withdrawing ground forces. But as the Marines began their fighting withdrawal from the compound, carrying their prisoner and valuable intelligence materials, the situation took a dangerous turn. The enemy reinforcements had arrived earlier than expected, and they were moving to cut off the Marines' escape route. Phoenix 6, this is Overwatch. Enemy vehicles have reached the valley entrance. They're deploying infantry to block the primary extraction route. Sarah felt ice form in the pit of her stomach. The Marines were about to be caught between the defenders they'd been fighting and fresh enemy forces that outnumbered them significantly. The carefully planned extraction was about to turn into a desperate running battle for survival. Steel 1-1, Phoenix 6. Be advised, enemy forces are blocking extraction point Alpha. Recommend immediate displacement to alternate extraction point Bravo. Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1. Negative on extraction point Bravo. Too much open ground. We'll have to fight our way through the roadblock. Sarah stared at her displays, her mind racing through the tactical possibilities. The Marines were loaded down with a prisoner, wounded comrades, and capture intelligence. Fighting their way through a roadblock would be costly in casualties, and there was no guarantee of success. Then, she remembered something from her advanced training at Quantico, a lesson about unconventional thinking in desperate situations. Sometimes the most unexpected solution was the most effective. Steel 1-1, Phoenix 6. I have an idea. Can you hold your current position for 10 minutes? Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1. We can hold for 10, but not much longer. What do you have in mind? Sarah was already working her radio, contacting units she hadn't spoken to all night. Guardian 2-1, Phoenix 6. I need you to simulate gun runs on the roadblock position, but do not engage. Make noise and show yourselves, but stay out of range of ground fire. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-1. Understand you want us to create a diversion. Exactly. Make them think you're going to attack from the air while I coordinate something else. Sarah switched frequencies and contacted the artillery battery that had been standing by to provide fire support. Thunder 6, Phoenix 6. I need immediate smoke rounds on the following coordinates. As white phosphorus rounds burst in the darkness, creating a thick smoke screen that would hide the Marines' movements, Sarah implemented the most audacious part of her plan. She contacted the base and requested an emergency helicopter insertion of the reaction force that had been standing by in case the primary mission went wrong. Hammer 2-6, Phoenix 6. I need you to insert your troops at landing zone Charlie and attack the roadblock from behind while the primary force attacks from the front. It was a complex, three-dimensional battle plan conceived and executed in real time under extreme pressure. Sarah was coordinating helicopters, artillery, and 2 separate Marine forces while under enemy fire, managing a tactical situation that would challenge even the most experienced commanders. The plan worked perfectly. As the reaction force attacked the roadblock from an unexpected direction, the primary force was able to break through and reach the extraction point. The Taliban reinforcements, caught between 2 Marine units and hammered by air support, were forced to withdraw or face annihilation. Phoenix 6, Steel 1-1. We're at the extraction point with the package. Outstanding job coordinating that breakout. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as she heard that all Marines were safely at the extraction point with their prisoner. But the mission wasn't over yet. They still had to get everyone back to the base safely. The helicopter extraction went smoothly with the Marines and their prisoner loaded aboard the waiting aircraft under cover of darkness. As the helicopters lifted off and headed back toward forward operating base Lightning. Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that the mission had been a complete success. But as she packed up her equipment and prepared to return to base, Sarah had no idea that her performance during the night's operation would soon become the subject of Marine Corps legend. The complex, multidimensional battle plan she had conceived and executed under pressure would be studied and admired for years to come. More importantly, she had earned something that couldn't be taught or awarded: the respect of every Marine who had participated in the operation. Her call sign Phoenix was no longer a joke. It was a badge of honor worn by a leader who had proven herself in the crucible of combat. The real test, however, was still to come. In less than 24 hours, Captain Sarah Martinez would face a situation that would transform her from a respected officer into a Marine Corps legend. But first, she had to survive the journey home. The morning after the successful raid brought an unusual calm to forward operating base Lightning. Captain Sarah Martinez sat in the debriefing room, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders as she reviewed the operations after-action reports. The mission had been textbook perfect: high-value target captured, valuable intelligence gathered, and, most importantly, all Marines returned safely. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, like the electric tension that preceded the violent thunderstorms that sometimes rolled across the Afghan mountains. Colonel Harrison entered the room carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, the good stuff he kept in his private office for special occasions. He handed one to Sarah and settled into the chair across from her, his weathered face showing a rare smile. "Captain, I've been in this man's Marine Corps for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of operations. What you did last night was exceptional. The coordination, the tactical thinking under pressure, the ability to adapt when the original plan went sideways. That's what separates good officers from great ones." Sarah accepted the praise with a nod, but her mind was already moving forward to the next challenge. In the military, success was measured not by single victories, but by consistent performance over time. Last night's operation had been a test, but she knew that every mission would bring new challenges that would require her to prove herself all over again. "Sir, the intelligence we gathered from the raid indicates that there's another high-value target operating in the region. Someone even more dangerous than the commander we captured last night." Harrison's expression grew serious. "Tell me what you've learned." Sarah opened the folder containing translated documents and intercepted communications. "The prisoner is talking, and the documents we recovered paint a picture of a larger operation. There's a Taliban commander named Khalil al-Masri who's been coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. According to the intelligence, he's planning something big, a coordinated assault on multiple coalition bases designed to inflict maximum casualties." The colonel studied the papers Sarah had spread across the table. Maps, photographs, communication intercepts, and handwritten notes in Pashto told the story of a sophisticated enemy network that had been operating under coalition radar for months. "The timeline is accelerated," Sarah continued. "Intelligence indicates that al-Masri moved up his schedule after learning about last night's raid. He knows we're closing in on his network, so he's launching his attacks within the next 48 hours. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Where's al-Masri operating from?" Sarah pointed to a location on the map, a remote valley system approximately 30 kilometers from their current position. "Here, in the Karengal Valley. It's some of the most difficult terrain in Afghanistan, which is why he's been able to avoid detection for so long." The Karengal Valley was notorious among coalition forces as one of the most dangerous areas in Afghanistan. The steep mountains and narrow valleys provided perfect cover for enemy forces, while the limited routes in and out made it nearly impossible to conduct surprise attacks. Several previous operations in the area had resulted in significant casualties with limited success. "The problem," Sarah continued, "is that he's not staying in one place. Our sources indicate he's moving between multiple camps, never spending more than one night in the same location. We need real-time intelligence to have any chance of finding him." Before Harrison could respond, the door burst open and Sergeant First Class Kim rushed in, his face flushed with urgency. "Sir, we've got a problem." Major Bradley's patrol is under heavy attack in Sector 7. They're requesting immediate assistance. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Sector 7 was a routine patrol area where attacks were rare. If the enemy was bold enough to assault a Marine patrol in what had been considered a relatively safe zone, it meant the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "What's their status?" Harrison demanded. 12 Marines in 2 vehicles. They're pinned down by heavy fire from multiple directions. At least 3 wounded, possibly more. They can't move, and they're running low on ammunition. Harrison was already moving toward the door. "Get the reaction force ready for immediate deployment. I want Apache helicopters in the air in 5 minutes." But Sarah was studying the map, her mind racing as she processed the tactical situation. Something about the attack pattern didn't feel right. The location, the timing, the intensity of the enemy fire. It was almost as if the Marines had walked into a carefully prepared trap. "Sir," she called out as Harrison reached the door. "I think this is connected to Al-Masri's operation. The attack location is positioned to draw our reaction forces into a specific area. If I'm right, there's going to be a second ambush waiting for our rescue forces." Harrison stopped and turned back to her. "Explain." Sarah moved to the large map that dominated one wall of the briefing room. "Look at the geography. If we send a reaction force along the most direct route to assist Major Bradley's patrol, they'll have to pass through this narrow valley here. It's perfect ambush country. Steep walls on both sides, limited visibility, no room to maneuver." She traced her finger along the likely route of advance. Al-Masri has demonstrated sophisticated tactical planning in his previous operations. I think Bradley's patrol stumbled into the outer edge of a larger ambush designed to lure in our rescue forces. Harrison studied the map, his expression growing darker as he considered the implications. "If you're right, we could lose a lot of Marines today." "There's another possibility," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as the plan formed in her mind. "We turn his trap against him. If Al-Masri is trying to draw us into an ambush, it means he's committed significant forces to the operation. This might be our chance to get him." The colonel looked at her with a mixture of respect and concern. "Captain, what exactly are you proposing?" Sarah moved to the communications console and began pulling up real-time intelligence feeds from the unmanned drones operating in the area. "We sent a reaction force along the expected route, but we make it look larger and more valuable than it really is. Radio chatter about high-ranking officers, extra vehicles to simulate a convoy, maybe even some deception about carrying valuable intelligence." She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing. "Meanwhile, we insert a smaller force via helicopter into the mountains above the valley. When Al-Masri's forces reveal themselves to attack our convoy, the helicopter-inserted team attacks from above while air support hammers them from overhead." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of Sarah's proposal. It was an audacious plan that would put Marines in significant danger, but it also offered the possibility of eliminating one of the most dangerous enemy commanders in the region. "The timeline is extremely tight," Sarah continued. "We'd have to coordinate multiple moving pieces while Major Bradley's patrol is still under fire. And if I'm wrong about Al-Masri's involvement, we could be sending Marines into an unnecessary fight." The radio crackled with an update from the besieged patrol. "Phoenix Base, this is Steel 2-1. We're taking heavy fire from at least 3 positions. We've got 2 urgent medical evacuations needed. We can't hold this position much longer." Major Bradley's voice was calm and professional despite the circumstances, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension. His Marines were in serious trouble, and they needed help immediately. Harrison made his decision. "Captain Martinez, you're right about this being bigger than a simple patrol ambush. I'm authorizing your plan, but I'm also making you the mission commander. If this goes wrong, it's on both of us." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She would be coordinating one of the most complex operations of her career while Marines' lives hung in the balance. But she also felt a surge of confidence. This was exactly the kind of challenge she'd trained for her entire military career. Sir, I'll need direct command authority over all air and ground assets in the area. This plan only works if everyone is moving in perfect coordination. Granted, Harrison replied immediately. What do you need? The next hour was a blur of activity as Sarah coordinated the most complex military operation of her career. She positioned Apache helicopters to provide overwatch and fire support, arranged for a special operations team to insert via helicopter into the mountains above the ambush site, and organized a convoy designed to look like a high-value target while actually being a highly trained reaction force ready to fight their way out of trouble. Most challenging of all, she had to coordinate the timing so that Major Bradley's patrol would be relieved just as the larger operation reached its critical phase. The Marines under fire couldn't wait indefinitely for rescue, but launching the rescue too early would compromise the larger mission to eliminate Al-Masri. Guardian to 1, Phoenix 6, Sarah spoke in her headset as she monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously. I need you to conduct a reconnaissance flight over Grid 41, RQQ 15000, 75000. Look for signs of enemy positions, but do not engage unless fired upon. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-1 copies. Beginning reconnaissance, run now. The helicopter pilot's report confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-1. I count at least 40 enemy fighters in prepared positions along the valley floor. This is definitely a planned ambush site. They're waiting for something. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction. Her tactical instincts had been correct. Al-Masri was indeed using Bradley's patrol as bait to draw coalition forces into a larger trap. Now she had to spring her own trap before the situation deteriorated further. All units, Phoenix 6. Execute Operation Counterstrike. Repeat, execute Operation Counterstrike. The carefully choreographed operation began to unfold across the Afghan mountains. The decoy convoy started moving toward the ambush site, its radio transmissions deliberately unencrypted so that enemy listeners would hear discussions about high-ranking officers and critical intelligence being transported. Meanwhile, the Special Operations Team was inserted via helicopter into positions overlooking the valley where Al-Masri's forces were waiting. Sarah monitored the operation from the command center, her eyes fixed on computer screens that showed the positions of friendly forces as blue icons and suspected enemy positions as red ones. The complexity of coordinating so many moving parts while Marines were still under fire was almost overwhelming, but her training allowed her to process information and make decisions with mechanical precision. Phoenix 6, this is Reaper 2-3, came the voice of the Special Operations Team leader. We're in position and have eyes on approximately 50 enemy fighters in the valley below. They appear to be waiting for the convoy to enter the kill zone. Reaper 2-3, Phoenix 6 copies. Hold your position until I give the execute order. Sarah switched frequencies to check on Major Bradley's situation. Steel 2-1, Phoenix 6. What's your current status? Phoenix 6, Steel 2-1. We're still pinned down, but holding our position. We can see the convoy approaching from the south. ETA to our position is approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That was how long Sarah had to orchestrate one of the most complex combat operations in recent memory. If everything went according to plan, they would rescue Bradley's patrol, eliminate Al-Masri's ambush force, and possibly capture or kill one of the most dangerous enemy commanders in the region. If something went wrong, they could lose dozens of Marines in a single disastrous engagement. All Guardian elements, Phoenix 6. Stand by for coordinated fire mission. Target packages are being uploaded to your systems now. Sarah had identified 12 separate enemy positions that would need to be neutralized simultaneously when the operation reached its climax. The Apache helicopters would engage the heavy weapons positions while artillery struck the command and communication sites. It would be a symphony of destruction that had to be perfectly timed to avoid hitting friendly forces. Phoenix 6, this is Overwatch, came the voice from the Predator drone circling high above the battlefield. I'm tracking what appears to be a high-value individual at the command position. Vehicle with antenna array and multiple security personnel. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. If the drone operator was right, they might have located al-Masri himself. This could be the opportunity they'd been waiting for to eliminate one of the most dangerous enemy commanders in Afghanistan. Overwatch, Phoenix 6. Can you confirm identity of the high-value individual? Phoenix 6, Overwatch. Negative on positive identification, but the individual matches the physical description and behavioral patterns we've been briefed on. It was decision time. Sarah could continue with the original plan to rescue Bradley's patrol and eliminate the ambush force, or she could modify the operation to specifically target the potential high-value individual. The decision would affect not just the immediate tactical situation, but potentially the broader strategic picture in Afghanistan. Sarah took a deep breath and made the call that would define her career. All units, Phoenix 6. Primary target has been identified. Modify your fire plans to ensure capture or elimination of high-value individual at Grid 41 or QQ 15025 75050. Danger close engagement is authorized. The words danger close carried special significance in military operations. They meant that friendly forces were so near to the target that the margin for error was essentially zero. Any mistake in targeting or timing could result in friendly casualties from their own fire support. But Sarah had calculated the risks and benefits, and she was confident that her Marines were skilled enough to execute the modified plan successfully. As she gave the final execute order, she had no way of knowing that her next radio transmission would become legendary in Marine Corps history. The moment of truth had arrived. The seconds that followed Sarah's execute order seemed to stretch into eternity. From her position at the command center, she watched the tactical display as multiple elements of her carefully orchestrated plan began moving simultaneously across the Afghan mountains. Blue icons representing friendly forces converged on red enemy positions, while Apache helicopters descended like mechanical angels of death toward their assigned targets. All units, Phoenix 6. Execute, execute, execute. The valley erupted in violence as the carefully planned ambush met an even more carefully planned counterambush. Apache helicopters opened fire with their 30mm cannons, sending streams of high-explosive rounds into enemy positions that had been lying in wait for the coalition convoy. Artillery shells whistled through the mountain air before detonating among Taliban fighters who suddenly found themselves under attack from directions they hadn't anticipated. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, her training allowing her to process the rapid flow of information and adjust the plan in real time as the situation developed. Through her headset, she could hear the controlled chaos of Marines executing a complex combat operation under extreme conditions. Guardian 2-1, good hits on target. Enemy heavy weapons position is neutralized. Reaper 2-3, we have eyes on multiple enemy Kia. Remaining fighters are attempting to withdraw to the north. Steel 1-2, we're advancing to relieve Steel 2-1. Enemy resistance is crumbling. But even as the operation unfolded with textbook precision, Sarah remained focused on the primary objective. The high-value individual that the drone operator had identified was still alive and potentially escaping. If al-Masri slipped away in the confusion of battle, this entire operation would be reduced to a tactical victory with limited strategic impact. Overwatch, Phoenix 6. Status on the high-value individual. Phoenix 6, Overwatch. Target is moving toward a vehicle at the north end of the compound. He appears to be attempting to escape with a small security detail. Sarah felt her heart rate spike. After months of hunting this particular enemy commander, he was about to slip through their fingers again. The original plan had been designed to eliminate his entire force, but it hadn't specifically accounted for his personal escape while the battle was still raging. She made a split-second decision that would define not just the operation, but her entire military career. Guardian 2-2, Phoenix 6. I need you to intercept a vehicle moving north from the target compound. High-value individual is attempting to escape. This is your primary mission. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-2. Roger, intercepting vehicle now. Be advised, target is moving through rough terrain. We'll have to get close for positive identification. Sarah watched her display as the Apache helicopter broke away from its assigned fire support mission and began pursuing the fleeing vehicle. She was asking the pilot to risk his aircraft and crew for a target that hadn't been positively identified based on intelligence that might be wrong. It was exactly the kind of decision that separated good commanders from great ones and good commanders from court-martialed ones. The helicopter chase played out across the screens in the command center as the Apache pilot used every bit of his skill to keep up with a vehicle that was racing across terrain that seemed impossible to navigate. The Taliban commander, if that's who was really in the vehicle, was clearly an experienced mountain fighter who knew the area intimately. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-2. I have visual on the vehicle. 3 occupants, armed with automatic weapons. They're heading for what appears to be a cave entrance. Sarah could see the tactical situation developing on her displays. If the fleeing fighters reached the cave system, they could disappear into a network of tunnels that had been used by Afghan fighters for generations. Once underground, they would be nearly impossible to track or engage. Guardian 2-2, Phoenix 6. You are authorized to engage the vehicle. Repeat, you are cleared to engage. The pilot's response was immediate. Phoenix 6, Guardian 2-2. Engaging now. The Hellfire missile streaked through the mountain air like a comet, its guidance system locked onto the fleeing vehicle. The explosion lit up the narrow valley, sending a pillar of smoke and debris into the clear Afghan sky. When the smoke cleared, the vehicle was destroyed, and there were no signs of movement from any survivors. But Sarah knew that destroying the vehicle wasn't enough. In military operations, especially those targeting high-value individuals, positive confirmation was essential. Too many operations had claimed success only to discover later that the wrong people had been killed. Reaper 2-3, Phoenix 6. I need your team to advance to the destroyed vehicle and confirm the identity of casualties. Exercise extreme caution. There may be unexploded ordnance in the area. The special operations team that had been inserted into the mountains above the valley began moving toward the crash site. These were some of the most elite Marines in the Corps, trained to operate in exactly this kind of dangerous, fluid situation. While the identification team moved toward their objective, Sarah continued coordinating the larger battle that was still raging throughout the valley. Major Bradley's patrol had been successfully relieved, and their wounded Marines were being evacuated by medical helicopters. The enemy ambush force had been largely eliminated, with survivors either dead or fleeing into the mountains. Phoenix 6, this is Steel 2-1. Major Bradley's voice came through clearly now that his position was no longer under fire. All my Marines are accounted for. 2 urgent medical evacuations have been completed successfully. We're ready to assist with the larger operation. Sarah felt a moment of relief. Bradley's patrol had been the catalyst for this entire operation, and knowing that those Marines were safe allowed her to focus completely on the primary mission. But the most important moment was still ahead. Phoenix 6, Reaper 2-3. We're at the crash site. 3 enemy Kia confirmed. Beginning identification procedures now. The next few minutes crawled by as Sarah waited for confirmation. The identification process had to be thorough. Photographs, fingerprints, and DNA samples that could be compared against known terrorist databases. In an age where intelligence was often incomplete or outdated, positive identification was the only way to be certain that they had eliminated the right target. Colonel Harrison had joined Sarah in the command center, along with several other senior officers who understood the significance of what was happening. If they had indeed eliminated Khalil al-Masri, it would represent one of the most significant counterterrorism victories in Afghanistan in months. Phoenix 6, Reaper 2-3, came the voice that would change everything. Positive identification confirmed. Primary target is among the Kia. Repeat, primary target has been eliminated. The command center erupted in subdued cheers as the significance of the announcement sank in. They had done it. After months of hunting one of the most dangerous enemy commanders in Afghanistan, Captain Sarah Martinez had coordinated the operation that finally eliminated him. But Sarah wasn't celebrating yet. Military operations weren't complete until every Marine was safely back at base, and every piece of equipment was accounted for. She continued coordinating the withdrawal of all forces from the area, ensuring that wounded Marines received proper medical care and that valuable intelligence was properly secured. It was during this final phase of the operation that Sarah made the radio transmission that would become legendary throughout the Marine Corps. As she prepared to notify higher headquarters about the successful completion of the mission, she remembered the call sign that had been used in one of the most famous special operations in American military history. Hammer Base, Phoenix 6. She spoke in her microphone, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Mission complete. Primary target eliminated. She paused for a moment, then added the words that would be repeated in Marine Corps barracks around the world for years to come. GERONIMO actual. The reference was immediate and unmistakable. GERONIMO had been the code word used to confirm the death of Osama bin Laden during the raid that eliminated the al-Qaeda leader. By using the same terminology, Sarah was indicating that they had achieved a victory of similar significance in their particular area of operations.